Hello everyone, this is my week 9/10 sketchbook tour and I chose example A. The materials I used were the B pencils, specifically 2B through 12B, H, 2H, 4H, and 6H, a tortillions, the shop towel, a mono-zero eraser, a kneaded eraser, and an X-Acto knife to sharpen my pencils. Since learning last week's concept of value scales, I found it helpful to make a value scale as accurate to my reference as possible at the beginning to help me essentially separate the values. And also for me, it helps me plan out what pencils I should stay within for each object. For the most part, these ended up being pretty accurate. It does also have to do with how heavy you push those values while you're drawing. So for this still life, I didn't know where to start or how to proportionate it correctly, which is why it came out more zoomed in than I would have liked. However, it was my first attempting the fold material, the background, the dark folds, the shapes within the background, and overall a full page drawing, which I give myself props for completing. So my process started with measuring where everything went, beginning with the vase since it is the most centered, then worked my way outwards to the pumpkin. I personally mapped out a rough outline of the lightest fold and didn't render it until the end, since it is one of the lightest values. I also should have listened to all of the previous example videos where they said that it is easier to not smudge if you work from left to right. So after figuring out those proportions, I started with rendering the vase and pumpkin before tackling that extremely dark valued background. This was actually the perfect example of a figure-ground relationship, which we just learned not too long ago. After rendering the shadows on the vase as accurate as possible, I moved on to the pumpkin, which was not too hard to render, but the shape of it was a little tricky since it was tilted, plus I had to make sure it didn't blend in with that vase. That's why adding this shadow right here to the vase was important. So once I was satisfied with the rendering on those two, I worked on the right side of the vase, which I initially thought was the best idea, but as I started rendering, it was starting to smudge a little, so now I know next time to work from left to right instead. But basically the process for the folds and material wasn't as hard as I thought. The main thing is just being patient with building up the shape direction within those darker values. And although I do have to continue working on that technique more, I think I did a pretty good job for my first attempt. As I got to this left side, I was more confident to build up these smaller folds. And then one of my favorite parts of this drawing were the folds on this left side right here. And although it's a little bit bold, I was happy with the contrast and the overall shape direction within those darker values and dark, not so dark values. And last but not least, I worked on the bottom folds, which I used the lightest H's I had plus a super light hand, and just made sure to render in the direction that the folds were going, and using my mono-zero eraser as needed to make it lighter in certain areas. Although this was a pretty tricky project, I would say it was one of my favorites because I was able to use all of the concepts and new tools I've learned over the last couple of weeks and really bring my drawing and objects to life. And that'll complete my week 9/10 sketchbook tour. Thank you.